Hello, everyone. It's another Sunday night, and I'm joined by Ben Michael Stevens to talk about his Halloween special, Bardo of the Unquiet Mind, a dark collection of short stories by the selfsame author. How are you doing today, Ben?
Man, I'm good. Tired as all get up, but I'm good.
Hey, that's all right. That's the author plight. If we're not tired, dreary, and kind of dreading living, it's just not getting that sort of spirit down right. Where do you think the good ideas come from? They say.
Very true.
Ah, hmm.
I always have the good ideas in my dreams, and then I wake up and write them down, and not quite so good.
Right. I'm actually very grateful I don't dream. So it's like, well, I dream, but it's like I don't remember anything about it ever. So it's like just kind of drifting away. Now, hallucinations. You can write those down all the day.
Amen.
So tell me about Bardo the Unquiet Mind. How are you? What is it about?
Okay, well, it was just something that I kind of wanted to just bring a little closure to. It's a collection of my horror stories that I wrote between the years 2016 and 2018. So during those 3 years, um, I had only begun to outline and draft um, the first draft of the Goddess Gambit, and I hadn't quite leveled up yet, if you will, as far as taking writing as seriously as I do today, and I was just kind of playing with, I was first getting onto social media and making friends with other authors for the first time, and just kind of marveling at you know what they were doing and going, wow, okay, so there's kind of seeing indie press for the first time, kind of just for the first time really understanding that it could be done well and that
Mm-hmm.
it's worthy of being taken seriously, and just really getting exposed to it for the first time, because until that time, until 2016, up until that point, I was reading big popular books by the big New York publishers. I was reading Neil Stevenson. I was reading Stephen King, William Gibson, Neil Gaiman. And I just that was my world. I didn't really know the world of indie writers at all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and well, it all started with a fellow named T.J. Gates, who I believe has three or four, maybe five short stories to his name. He's not a very prolific writer, but he's very good. And he had drawn a picture and uploaded it to the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society Facebook page, of which I was a part of. And I really liked his art, and I sent him a friend request, and he accepted it. And then as I followed this guy, he was the very first indie writer I ever met. And then met a couple of his friends. I think one of them is on, maybe even in a Superversive book, or he might be in MAGA 2020. His name's Scott Reinhardt.
Yeah, I've heard of him before.
Okay, yeah. And so he was kind of the um, long story short, him and TJ had a falling out over politics, and it was through Scott that I actually got to meet Superversive.
Hmm.
And so I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a little bit. But anyway, I was following this guy, and he's published. Hey, I got a story published in this book, and it was some little anthology by a British imprint. It's just real pulpy schlock, body horror, Lovecraftian kind of stuff. and
Interesting.
uh, and they were putting these out, kind of frequently. And I messaged him, and I was like, "So what's this about?" And he's like, "Oh, they do these calls. You can go to this website and look at their open calls, and you can send them stories." And I was like, "Wow, maybe I should try that." And so I wrote a horror story. Um, the first one I wrote is in Bardo. It's my first story ever to see print. It's called The Chief in Yellow, and I wrote it when I was working in West Africa in the oil fields there. And I had gotten an infection in my leg, and it got so bad they decided to fly me back to the States because they didn't really trust the medicine that was available in Cabinda City to handle it.
You're telling me that
There-
snake's blood can't cure an infection?
yeah, there. Believe it or not, there's still a really strong, uh, witchcraft, witch doctor kind of culture in some of the smaller towns there. I worked with a local kid, great hand, always in good spirits, good kid. It was a local, and he was one of the floor hands on the drilling rig of the offshore platform I worked at. And one day I saw him in really down spirits, and I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that his baby had passed away. And I said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And if I may be so bold, can I ask, what happened? And he said, "Well, my uncle put the evil eye on it," and so he firmly believed his child was killed because of his uncle's, witchcraft.
Mm,
That's very very prevalent, and I was immersed in that. I worked there for 3 years. I
yeah,
went to local weddings. I went on walkabouts in the jungle. Um, ate the local food. Tried some of their different herbal concoctions. Their
right,
different
right.
beer. I was really immersed in that. I try to get my Anthony Bourdain on, right? And well, I had this infection in my leg, and by the time I was flying from Cabinda to Luanda, which getting from Malongo Base where I worked to the United States is about a 48-hour process, so it's not fast.
Wow.
And, yeah, and I was a third of the way into my journey flying from Cabinda City to Luanda, and I had this. I was in the grips of a fever, and the sunlight was coming through the little plexiglass window on the de Havilland Dash 8 plane that we were on, and it was making a symbol on the wall that looked a lot like that Triskelion looking thing that is associated with the King in Yellow, the from the Hastur cycle of H.P. Lovecraft, Darluth, right? And
Hmm.
Chambers is King in Yellow. And I've been a Lovecraft fan for many many years. Back in my degenerate days, and Lord knows I'm still a sinner, but I don't revel in my degeneracy like I used to. Right?
Hmm.
And I started having this fevered dream, and it gave me an idea. When I got home after I got fixed up, I wrote this short story, sent it off to Horrified Press, and they published it in Lovecraftiana magazine. And that was the beginning of my so-called writing career. And I kind of got hooked on it. It was a good biofeedback loop. It was great to get that motivation going. Somebody out there thinks my stuff's worth reading.
Hmm.
And so as I played with Goddess Gambit, I would take breaks when I was in a slog, and I would, if a short story inspired me, if I got an idea for something, I would take a couple weeks off of Goddess, and I'd whip up a 5 to 7,000 word short story and send it out to another open call. And so, the Bard of the Unquiet Mind is a collection of those stories that I wrote in that time period. I'd also gotten laid off during that time, and about 80% of the stories, maybe 75% of the stories in the book have been published in other anthologies in the past. Um, and about 25% are unreleased. One of them got accepted 3 times, and then they changed their mind in the end because it was a very unorthodox kind of story. It's a dialogue only in the format of a online chat room like we're in right now.
Right, right.
And so it doesn't really have, it's not typical prose, and it has pictures in it and things like that. So a lot of people shied away from publishing that, but it's one of the ones I'm really happy about. And so anyway, I wanted to put this out a long time ago, but publishing delays after publishing delays kept happening to a couple of the stories, and so I didn't want to stop working on the No God saga to flesh it out, because I really thought it needed to have 13 stories, right? One, because the unlucky 13 and all the superstition that goes along with that I thought was appropriate for a horror collection. And two, if you look at what I've done with Goddess Gambit and To Rule in Hell, I buck conventional wisdom in the indie publishing world, and I write long books. I want to give uh, people a lot of bang for their buck. I just feel like it's a fair trade, so people can expect,
We're talking
uh,
about the impossible hope. Uh,
uh, No, actually, that was this year,
Ah, yes.
2019, and so these stories were all from 1 to 3 years ago, and the actual two in question that I was referring to that caused the delays were the planetary
Yes.
anthology and what do you want to call it? What's the it's not Naga, the one that sells pretty well for Superversive that has
Forbidden
Milo.
Thoughts?
Forbidden Thoughts, yes. Okay, so I mentioned that through Scott Reinhardt, I got to meet Superversive and Jason Rennie and the rest of the gang, and it all started with MAGA 2020. Before MAGA 2020 existed, the company that had been publishing my horror stories, Horrified Press, they had an open call in early 2016. Excuse me, for some Trump anthologies. Right, they were going to release these at the same time. One was going to be a pro-Trump anthology, and one was going to be an anti-Trump anthology. And they're a horror imprint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Scott was the editor for the pro-Trump one, and a fellow named Alex Johnson was the editor for the anti-Trump. And the publisher picked them because they personally have they personally land on those sides of the spectrum. So they would be good editors, if you will. And Scott invited me to write, and I'm a fledgling wannabe writer, and I got an invite to write, and I thought, wow, this is a big deal. I've never been invited to write somewhere before. This is kind of a big deal. I don't want to say no, but at the time, and I don't feel that the same way now, but at the time, I was very hesitant to marry my pen name and my writing to anything political. And so I was nervous about this, and I made myself a deal. I said, well, I will write a pro-Trump horror story, which I had no idea how to do. I'm like, how do you write a pro-Trump horror story? Um, I will do that if I can also write an anti-Trump horror story, and Alex accepts it for his anthology. If they both get accepted, I'll sign the contracts. Otherwise, I'm not doing it. Well, lo and behold, they both got accepted. I was all right, perfect. Now I have plausible deniability. I can legitimately say this is an exercise in fiction and is not a political statement. I don't believe in message fiction, or I didn't then, right?
Right, right.
And well, long story short, the pro-Trump one got canceled because many of the authors felt the cover art was bad and not very pro-Trump. They thought it was an anti-Trump cover, and they were led to believe that they were writing for a pro-Trump anthology. So the publisher got mad with the editor and the authors and said, you know what, I'm just canceling the project. And I'm like, great, that's awesome. So now I have an anti-Trump anthology out there, or an anti-Trump story out there. So that's lovely.
Right.
And so they're going, make your plans in pencil and bring a big eraser, right? Well, Scott, he picked it up and ran with it, and he goes, hang on, guys, I got something. And he sent a query to Jason Rennie, Superversive Press, and Jason said, I'll pick it up. He picked it up, and that became MAGA 2020.
Mm.
And I was like, whew, I'm saved. All right. Well, about a month later, I think Don was the editor, and what's the other? Mona Lisa
Ah,
was
Mona
also
Lisa Foster. Yeah.
yes, Mona Lisa Foster and Don Grimes were the editors for that. The two of them and Jason himself, all three of them contacted me and kind of real politely, kind of touchy-feely said, hey, would it bother you if we omitted your story from MAGA 2020? And I was like, what? Why? And I was the first one to submit to it. I was invited to it, and I was supposed to be the first story in the original imprint. Scott was gonna open with my story, and they said we really like it. It's just so gruesome. We don't think it's gonna be a good fit for what we're going for. So this kind of goes back to why the authors first had it out with Horrified in the first place, is because they really wrote these like uplifting pro-Trump stories. Like no one got the memo; it was a horror.
Right.
And so when it came out as a horror imprint, they were like, "Whoa, no, we're not cool with this." And they all backed out, and that's why it got canceled in the first place. So mine was the only one that was like actually a horror story. And and Jason and Don and Mona Lisa were like, we really like it, but it's just a little over the top. There's there's a sequence in there with the Moloch worshippers or having intercourse with children, and there's live on television third trimester abortions going on and all this not crazy stuff, right?
Right.
Because I'm like, the only way I can figure out how to write a pro-Trump horror story was to make it like a warning. So like the character, he goes on like this vision where he sees what the world will look like if Hillary won. Right. So it's like
Right.
kind of like one of these tropes where a guy goes to the future. It's very much like It's a Wonderful Life.
I was
The
thinking that
angels,
exact thing.
the angel shows him what the world would be like if he had never been. So the CIA agent doses the character with LSD and puts him in a sensory deprivation tank and sends him to the future, and he sees what the future is going to look like if Hillary wins. And so that's the CIA agent's way of recruiting this guy into what will become the meme that will eventually get Trump elected. And that's the only way I could. That's the only way I could make it work.
The only mistake you've done is making the CIA vaguely good.
Well, there's two. It's explained in the story. There are two camps in the CIA. There's the Cowboys and the Angels,
Hmm.
and they're actually fighting amongst. There's like an internal war within the deep state where some of them are fighting for the cause of good, and some of them, the majority of them, are fighting for the cause of evil.
Hmm. Oh, I know.
Right.
Yep.
So when I was kind of like, to be honest with you, I was a little butthurt, and but Jason, said, "Don't worry about it. I want to include this story in Forbidden Thoughts too, and we're going to be doing that in like a month or two." Well, a month or two turned into like a year or two. It finally just never happened. And Pluto never happens. It looks like it's going to happen now, ironically enough. But about 6 months ago, I wrote Jason and said, "Look, I just want to release these short stories so I can just kind of put that chapter of my life behind me because I'm not the same person I was when I wrote them.
Hmm.
I just want to put them out there. Uh, Kind of a low cost, low investment publication. The most expensive thing about it was the Matt Margolis cover, which he did a fantastic job of.
Oh yeah.
Um, and then I'm running some ads that cost me a little bit of money. But other than that, there's no editor per se. I paid a proofreader to just go through it, but they'd already all been published before. I just wanted to make sure they were up to snuff, and I wrote a little essay before each story explaining how the story came about, what its genesis was, and this and that. And I also wrote a foreword and an afterword of the book explaining where I was mentally 3 years ago when I was writing this really dark stuff, and why I saw a kindred spirit in H.P. Lovecraft. He's uh, there's a lot has been said in Lovecraftian fan circles about his egregious racism and this and that and the other, right? And what I found in Lovecraft, which really made sense to me before I found God, was a man who couldn't come to terms with a universe that was bigger than him. The march of time, the changes in society and culture were so egregious to him. They were this. The world didn't make sense to him. The changes in the world didn't make sense to him, right? And that we can look back on that now, and if you're of that mind, you can point your finger at him and criticize him because he uh, was having a hard time coping with the changes in civil rights, equal rights amongst minorities, and things of that nature. It's very easy to look back and judge the man, but people aren't being they're not being they're being disingenuous by doing that because honestly, he was a product of his time. It's not like he was the only racist in some sort of woke culture,
He was
right?
he was also like mentally out of it. Like he he was some sort of autistic. Almost
Oh
guaranteed,
yeah,
Lovecraft was. Like it's a
absolutely.
it's a wonder he even got
Socially
here.
retarded. He's a hermit, awkward. He had one love of his life. Didn't like socializing. Loved cats. I mean, really isn't that great of a writer. His prose sucks, but his mind, his world building is unparalleled. And
I
it's
disagree entirely. I think
really
he still stands up as a master of the craft. And it's partially a lot of it's the whole big picture of it. He spends a lot of time on descriptions and stuff like that, which isn't in vogue in this current culture. But
well, he was doing that because he was paid by the word.
sure, that doesn't invalidate that he did it very well.
Fair
Um,
enough. Fair
like
enough.
there was two kind of pulp writers, the long form or the guys who just like pumped it out like they're some sort of 150. Um, like getting the 50 cal out.
Mm-hmm.
And they got plenty of 50 cal and plenty of terrorists. But then there's guys like Lovecraft who kind of produced the long works. Then you have Hodgson and other guys as well. And it's like even though they were paid by the word, they still produced, great stories because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm of the opinion that we lose something by focus on just the fast-moving, action-packed, Space Marine doing whatever. Not that I'm criticizing it or those who write it. I'm just
Well,
saying that
actually,
like it's if you don't have the description, the world building, the choices into it, you start losing track of what the art is actually about, and you start like creating something that will be eaten and then discarded. It's why I appreciate Galaxy's Edge and Terran Armor Corps so much until Richard Fox made a very bad choice at the beginning of book 6, I think, where what's her
uh,
name goes crazy.
oh yeah. Well, she'd been going crazy for some time.
Yeah, but how he did it though, it just like I just put down the book and I haven't picked him up again.
Really?
Yeah, like it's bad. Like you can do crazy, like that's the whole horror genre, but you can't do
Right.
it like the way he did it. Like it's not what he did, it's how he did it. Like when you're talking to your
Gotcha.
kid, listen.
Is that Ferrum Core that you're referring to?
No, it's everyone. But no, I'm kidding. Corey actually does it pretty well. We just have to kind of yank the leash occasionally to get him
Right.
back on track. Um,
Oh, I meant book 6 of the Terran Armor Core. That's the Ferrum Core.
yeah, where I think it's book
The beautiful
6.
cover with Stacy sitting on the throne.
Maybe I think so.
Yeah,
It's
that's got to be his best cover.
oh, it is. It is. It's maybe it's 5. I can't remember. It's the
Mm.
last one I have.
The last Aeon was book 5, I believe.
Book
No, that
5.
was
Oh
4.
no, book 5 I read. So this was book 6.
Ferrum Core,
Then yep. And
Latin for
it's
Ironheart.
yep. And it's like the way she did it, like revealing what she revealed and stuff like that. You can have insane characters making revelations, but something that colors everything that happens before and after either needed to
Mm-hmm.
be at the end of this book or the end of the previous book, nowhere else. Like
I gotcha.
you cannot put it in any other place.
Well,
Otherwise,
I can't wait to get that far. I haven't gotten that far yet. I sidetracked and started listening to the Terra Nova ones that he did with Josh Hayes.
yep, those go in and out for me. I haven't I'm kind of behind on them. The first one was
Yeah,
really good though.
I was hoping to get fully caught up, uh, so I wouldn't show my ass with when I see him at Vegas. But I'm just I'm just way behind, and I'm not going to get caught up in the next week. So
That's all right. Willie
it is
Ram
what it is.
says, "What is a good way to portray someone losing grip on hand reality due to supernatural exposure?" I think you've got a little bit of that in Bardo, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, okay, so um, that to me, okay, that, the stories in Bardo, I say they're Lovecraftian, and they do have mention of different elements of the mythos, the actual, you know, what do you want to call them, great old ones,
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature. But I don't focus on them. Right? It's not like just this big, I see a lot of Lovecraftian fiction today, and it's just like night gaunts running around. It's just all in your face, right?
Yep.
You know, Cthulhu's. No, I like the more subtle. It's there, but it's in the background, and I really focus on like what this gentleman who asked the question. I focus on the psychological aspect of
Yep.
it. And to me, that's really kind of what it's all about. And you know, a good way to show it is that it can come across as a number of things. Like our minds, one of the quintessential elements in Lovecraft's original stories, at least in my opinion, were our inability to grasp it,
Hmm.
our inability to really apprehend it. It's kind of like if you go into like a Christian mythos, we have this beatific vision. You know, this idea that when you come face to face with God, it's beyond anything you could possibly describe. And so, you know, throughout history, if you get into this dark stuff, if you start, you know, poking and prodding at folk horror and conspiracy, you know, theories of that relate to this kind of material, there's a theory out there that I kind of like, and I don't subscribe to it in my personal beliefs, but it's fun. It's fun for fiction, and that's that there's some sort of phenomenon that has existed side by side with us since the dawn of time, and our reports of this phenomenon change with the era, right? So
Hmm.
whatever cultural lens that you happen to catch a glimpse through. So, and that's all we can do is just catch a glimpse of this alien other, because we can't comprehend it all. Or if we were to see it all, we would lose our minds, and become babbling idiots. You know, we would be the guy in the straitjacket who ends up in the Arkham Asylum. You know, using his own blood to write foreign alien cuneiform on the walls and things of that nature, right?
Exactly.
But when you catch a glimpse of it, your brain has to adjust, right? It's like our brains are amazing filters, and and so depending on what era you're in, you might see, or what culture you come from, you might see this thing, and your brain's going to change it into something that's not, so that you can slightly cope with it, right? You know, like even going back to the Christian mythos, you know, when the angels appear, you know, that we have this idea that, you know, in modern art that they're going to be, you know, beautiful humanoids, asexual, you know, humans with wings, and that, but there's descriptions of, you know, rings within rings, like wheels turning inside of wheels, 1,000 eyeballs, fire in the sky, you know, just
Hmm.
just absolute nonsense. And to me, that's very Lovecraftian. It's like, yeah, there's
Yep.
something so alien you can't comprehend it. And oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to. I have a technician here. Oh, hold on, just a second, please.
Just mute yourself. You'll be fine. Anyway. So to talk more about it, Odd Woolly Ram says, "Odd side thought: would God seem chthonic to a damned sinner? Yes, in a way, but because he is perfect and holy, it'll be less base and more pinnacle. Part of the thing about the Cthulhu mythos is that even though these things are beyond us, more powerful than us, above us in every way, you know, etc., they're all base creatures. They're not good and holy or anything like that. They're all disgusting. Surely, you know, I assume an elder thing must have a good look to them or something like that. But these aren't creatures of purity and holiness and all that jazz. They're just creatures of power, base power, maddening power. So it's a completely different look to it. A better way to describe it is William Hope Hodgson's Nightlands. These things might have the appearance of a slowly turning wheel, a bell, so on and so forth, but they rip the souls out of men and destroy them utterly. And it's implied that their gods are so high up there, these things that are more like the ideal personifications of sin than they are, you know, something in real existence.
Absolutely.
Don't even pay attention to what their lesser beings do, except when they are a bit peckish, to eat them. I had a character in my Jasper Silver novel, which I need to write the sequels of sometime, where he basically goes on a rant while his machine body fights a Templar. Um, an enhanced Templar, of course, where he's gonna fight his way up and be the eater instead of the devoured. But of course, it's all foolishness. And later on, I'll pull that theme out to show how foolish he really was. But yeah,
Nice.
it's there's even though God has a certain unknowableness about him right now because he cannot physically come down here in all his glory. He still came down here as a man, and some believe he still wanders around doing things according to his will.
The Holy Spirit.
Yes, but also like I literally meant dressed as a beggar to provide a test of character.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Any number of things.
Well, see,
Um,
like I like that. I remember thinking as I was going through RCIA a couple years during my conversion. Um, there's a bit of the gospel, that it was from last weekend's reading or yesterday's reading. I think, where what you do for the least of us or least of them is that you do to me,
mhm,
uh, right? And what you don't do, and it reminded me of the beginning of Beauty and the Beast, right? The old
mhm,
beggar that comes to the castle door, and the lord of the castle turns the beggar away, and then she curses him, because so like you never know. Even the Buddhist, you don't. The person you're passing on the subway might be the Buddha, you know.
mhm.
So hey, if would you mind if I took a minute to read you the foreword to Bardo? I believe it covers exactly what we're talking about here.
Go for it,
And
man.
okay, so it's kind of the point. You'll understand why in the second half of this excerpt. The beginning's a little rambling, a little personal, but it does touch on what we've been discussing here as far as what makes Lovecraftian fiction Lovecraftian, and what exactly the great old ones are. So this is from the forward, my little essay, if you will, that opens the anthology. Horror, horror and evil, tragedy and torment. Those who have read my novels, The Goddess Gambit and To Rule in Hell, know that these topics are not topics that I typically shy away from, and yet overall, my stories are, at least in the end, uplifting and superversive, or the opposite of subversive, or grimdark, as the cool kids are calling it these days. The stories found in this collection are not that. Here you will find some real grit, dark tales, sometimes gruesome, sometimes subtle. Good will not triumph over evil. Better worlds will not be created. Why write these tales at all? To what end? Or perhaps a better question would be, why publish them? The answer to that first question, at least for me, is simple. Writing these tales was a way to exorcise my own demons. I can't speak for other authors, and perhaps there exists those who write horror simply because they enjoy it, but I wrote these stories as a way to come to terms with a world that I found horrific. Long before I found peace through my faith, I found myself lost and extremely disgruntled. What I saw going around me, both locally and globally, so upset me that I thought that I may go mad. But there was no hope for humanity, ad nauseum. It was while in this headspace, a place in which I dwelled for most of my adult life, I found myself drawn to the works and extended universe created by the late, great H.P. Lovecraft. Nowadays, Cthulhu and his ilk have seeped into every part of pulp culture, from guest appearances in Dungeons and Dragon games, where he can be killed by mere mortals, don't get me started, to your local Gamer Geek store, where he can be found and purchased both in Funko Pop Big Head plastic and cuddly plushy forms. As I'm sure you've already astutely surmised, this does not please me. Am I some Lovecraftian hipster? Perhaps a curmudgeonly stuck-up purist writer? Can't people just be allowed to enjoy things? Yes and yes, all of the above. There's nothing wrong with people enjoying things. Great, fine, have at. But for me, the Cthulhu mythos can better be enjoyed, better appreciated, if we see it through the lens of its primary creator. There were others: Derleth, Chambers, Howard, and some could even argue Poe, H.P. Lovecraft. Much has been said on the matter of Lovecraft, his peculiarities, his isolation, his sad, lonely life. his love for cats, and his egregious racism. We could at this point really get into all that, and I encourage you to do so on your own. But this collection is not a biography or a critique. It's a tip of the hat to a kindred spirit. In the immortal words of Tenacious D, this is just a tribute. Wait, am I saying that I find kinship with a blatant and unrepentant racist? No, of course not. What I find is a writer who didn't understand the world around him or all the vast changes happening within it. There were things that just didn't make sense to him, things that terrified him and shook him to his core. Now we can either loathe him for the nature of his fear and prejudice, or perhaps we can sympathize. Lovecraft's racism may be well nothing more than a product of his time. Maybe, maybe not. For me, it doesn't matter. Not really. What matters to me is that he took his fear of the world, a world in which he saw forces greater than himself, or any man for that matter, and channeled it into something new, unique, and extraordinary. And that brings us back around to the mythos itself, and my Puritan hipster outlook on it. The beings and forces presented in the mythos were never meant to be something that one could defeat with a sword. Even if said sword was a magic +5 holy avenger, they were unstoppable. And worse, they were indifferent. That's right, indifferent. Here, we do not have devils and demons who exist for the sake of corrupting souls as a way to get back against a creator god who banished them from heaven. Here, we do not find monsters that can be bested with a well-placed shot from a magnum or by a young psychic girl and her nerdy friends. Sam and Dean aren't coming in the Apollo. Harry Dresden is a fantasy. There is no defense against the dark arts. Do not collect $100. Do not pass go. And perhaps, most terrifyingly of all, there is no salvation from above. In Lovecraft's world, God isn't real. The only gods are these creatures, more forces really, collectively referred to as the Great Old Ones. Men have tried in vain to worship them, perhaps to gain favor, but in the end, all they acquire is madness and death. For even a glimpse of the truth behind the veil of the universe is enough to make one lose his sanity forever. The stars will be right someday. The Great Old Ones will awaken from their deathless slumber, and they will consume worlds. There is nothing you or anyone can or will do. It is hopeless. That, boys and girls, is what Lovecraftian fiction is. Thank God it's just fiction, right? True to the intent, I personally cannot think of anything terrifying than that. A cold, vast, indifferent universe. Perhaps some of you are holding this tomb right now and feel the same way this very second. It's okay, I did too. These tales were my way of coping with that outlook. I have since had a great change of heart and mind, but during the 3-year span in which these tales were written, I saw things very much in the way old Howard did. Race relations have nothing to do with it. But I did see a cold, uncaring universe marching across time, devouring all in its path. From troubling developments in politics and society to the advent of invasive technology and the subsequent erosion of personal privacy, to foreign wars and terrorism, Western imperialism, sexual degeneracy, to deeply personal tragedy and loss. This leads me to the answer of the second question. If I am a writer who believes our words can bring something to the world, one reader at a time, and endeavor to use this power for good, why publish this dark and troubling stuff at all? The answer is simple and twofold. One, I don't see the world that way anymore. These stories can be nothing more than that, a story, a spooky tale to keep you up at night and give you disturbed dreams. We humans are funny creatures. Part of us like to be scared. From roller coasters to haunted houses, part of that fear makes us feel alive. Perhaps someone will read this volume and say to themselves, no way, not the world can't be this dark. I'm going to go out and prove that. And if that happens, even to just one reader, I will be satisfied. Or perhaps to that reader who still sees the world the way I once did, the way H.P. Lovecraft did, they can find a way through these dark tales to exorcise their own demons and cope for just one more day. That one day may be enough. You never know when the miracle will happen. Despite how you or I feel about our world, dear, there is evil and there is darkness in it. Bad things happen all the time, many of them not accidental. If you read books to escape that for a little while, to get a brief respite from it, then perhaps this book is not for you. But if, like listening to loud heavy metal music, cheer up, you are that person that can dip their toes in the muck and play in the shadows for a spell, and walk away from that refreshed and entertained, then please, tell me to shut up so you can get on with the stories. Now that we have narrowed down the audience to you, come take my hand and let me lead you into the dark side, just for a bit of fun. Let's exorcise our demons together and live to tell about it. B. Michael Stevens, Halloween 2019.
Outstanding. I'll admit, I don't really do the whole exercise my demons through writing thing. It's more about examining something, but I always love to read it, especially when they do it so well, and I know you're a good writer.
Well, I
Let's
appreciate that.
see here. Willie Ram says one important aspect of horror is that it is an acceptable form of memento mori, which I agree with. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
you will die. Of course, Christians only die once, but we always kind of, death is more of a transient property than it is an actual thing. But there's always to me a horror of aspect of living in this world as you described. After all, if you're not a Christian, if you don't have a God you can rely on, the world doesn't make sense, and either you find something to live for, or you become destructive in some way, shape, or form. A lot of the cruelty of the world would cease if people would take a viewpoint beyond their own lives, but they're just normal people. They won't ever
Yeah.
stop.
I think it
Uh,
was one of the Eastern Orthodox saints that said, if it weren't for the fact that I know, God will have the final say, then what I see in the world would drive me mad.
mhm. I agree with that statement. Of course, I've already gone mad and come out of it, as many people tend to do. Uh, but once you get there, you sort of give up on these horror aspects of it, and then you realize that the real danger was never physical, but spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why I appreciate Hodgson the more I age, over Lovecraft even, is that he understood that there are physical dangers, giants and goblins and unhumans and abhumans, and then there's the slowly turning wheel and the tolling bell, and the watchers that squat out in the dark, which have more power over your soul than they ever will over your body, though they do affect the
I'm gonna
body
have
as
to.
well.
I'm gonna have to read that. He wrote the Nightland. Is that it?
That's right.
One of the very first reviews of the Goddess Gambit came in and said that I must have gotten inspiration from Nightland, Hodgson's Nightland, and I had never heard of it at that point. And it's been coming up over and over again. You're the umpteenth person to mention it to me. I'm gonna have to read this. I've never read them.
It's probably the cornerstone of Christian horror, true Christian
Really?
horror. Um, Not in the sense of like the Lovecraft is the cornerstone of horror, period, but rather there's an element, Christian element to Hodgson that isn't easily ignored. You kind of recognize it through his writing, of course. Um, the Nightland. It's like this: if you only read the first like 10 chapters, I won't blame you. Like, really, no one reads the entire Nightlands over and over again. You read the beginning bit because it's some of the best world building ever put out. And then, you read until you can't take no more. Not because it's bad, it's just, you'll have to read it.
I'll have to
Uh,
check it out. I can get through some dry stuff. I had. I just consumed Lord of the World last summer,
wow.
and that was written in what 1903. It's
I never read it. Uh,
it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic, and more than a little ironic that Pope Francis recommends it. Maybe it's just that I'm not going to go
Yeah, Pope Francis is its own thing, its own horror show. But
there. Yeah, I could go off. I'm not
yeah.
gonna.
Oh,
That's a different podcast.
both of us could go off. Like, it's one of those things where it's like there's a certain level of horror to it.
Mm-hmm.
But however, it's not a horror that can't be surmounted.
Amen. No, it's
What?
just that just say that it's considered to be in literature circles. It's considered to be the world's first dystopian science fiction novel, and it was written by
Wow.
Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson, a Catholic priest. It predates 1984. It predates Brave New World, and it brilliantly demonstrates the consequences of it's like a science fiction telling of the coming of the Antichrist, formation of a one world government, and the first thing they go about to do, the first order of business, is to outlaw Christianity.
Yep.
And Rome gets bombed. It culminates with the apocalypse. It's just a brilliant novel, and I would say that Bergoglio has read it and used it as a how-to manual.
I would be surprised. But but like it's one of those things with Catholics. You guys never really take Protestants in the picture. It would be like kind of like what happened to the Protestants. Well, they got wiped out to the last man, and they're somehow still fighting. So, you know,
Pastor Jim is out burying the King James.
exactly. You understand. It's like one of the funny things is that sometimes people bring up the Cathars and stuff like that, and it's like, yeah, the Cathars were heretics, but they were Protestant, like they were proto-Protestant. Yeah, but that doesn't mean they were right. Now, if we're talking about those guys in the Balkans who got wiped out and we never really hear of them anymore, those guys were, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's yeah, it's. I actually wrote Jasper Silver where Earth remains is mostly Catholic, but space is mostly Protestant because Protestants can basically thrive anywhere and they don't need anything. That's the basic
Well, that's
logic.
the whole Protestant work ethic and individualism, right?
Yep,
It's a beautiful thing. That's what made America what it is,
yep. But it's
or what it was.
I've discovered that it has a certain grounding effect to how you view the world. Like they have a very like not that they don't believe miracles happen. Miracles happen all the time, but it's more like the supernatural isn't as involved in people's lives as the Catholic or Eastern Orthodox worldview is. And I've
Right.
discovered that like you can actually sort of trace how supernatural occurrences and myth and stuff like that as a society becomes more modern, more educated, and retains a certain level of low church Protestantism, it just kind of disappears.
Mm.
Um, and it kind of like I don't know changes. Like the monsters change. It's not fairies. It's like the Hell Batman from Wisconsin or something.
Right.
That sits in the forests and watches.
Mm.
Or something more. How do I want to put it? It's like it's a physical threat rather than a spiritual threat. Because there's this like unerring faith that our spiritual is already taken care of, provided, the real threat is sin, or Bigfoot. Um,
Mm.
it's a good line. I need to remember that. The real threat is sin or Bigfoot. One of those two. They're going to get you in Protestant town. Um, aliens and so on and so forth. And
It's
then,
funny that it's funny that we ended up discussing religion a bit here because so I was put, before Nano kicked off and I got back to work. I've just been between writing and working, I really have been extremely busy and not even sleeping like I ought to, and working out like I ought to, and
mm-hmm.
so I haven't really been keeping up on pushing my ads and pumping things, pimping things out on social media. Um, like the couple days after Bardo dropped, the audiobook of Goddess dropped, and I need to get on that and start an ad. If not just for my sake, but for Ken's, who did a fantastic job and deserves to make some money.
Oh, he's fantastic.
So I've just really been slacking on that, and I'm hoping to pick up the slack here, during breaks in Vegas and stuff next week. But what I was publishing or pimping things out on social media last week before I came back to work, um, somebody tagged me in a post on Facebook, and I opened it up, and it was one of my Catholic priests. That he's my confessor, actually,
Mm-hmm.
Father Freddie Martinez, out here in Midland, Texas.
You're sitting in the
And
booth and he's like, listen, I've seen your Facebook feed. There's things you're not telling me.
oh, worse. It gets worse. There's a picture of him. He tagged me on Facebook. There's a picture of him holding Bardo of the Unquiet Mind. And I just picked up a book that was written by a friend, and I went, "Oh no,
Oh no.
oh no!"
You're like
Right. So
dashing out to the church. Oh,
I messaged him instantly, and I was like, "Father, this is not a wholesome book." And he's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "This is a really bad book. It's really dark, gruesome, hopeless, unchristian book." And he goes, "Oh, I like horror. It's cool." And I was like, So I saw him the other day at mass and just said hi to me and said he wanted to go out to grab lunch or dinner one of these days. And so I'm wondering what if I'm in trouble or not.
Nah, he probably enjoyed it. He's like, you know what?
Oh,
This is quite refreshing. Compare, and he like just stares off into the distance, and like you kind of see flashbacks where he's just sitting there, like fingers to the forehead, and it's like, what are my parishioners getting up to? That's not how you
well, there's
use
not
a
a lot
dining
of
room
body
set.
horror in it.
Yeah.
There are two of the stories have some pretty gruesome body. One of them is a bit rapey,
Ah.
but mostly it's mostly psychological horror. But those two that I mentioned, they're pretty bad,
Hmm.
you know. But as far as like body horror and uh, the rapey bits, so it's not a it's not a collection of kind stories and stuff. But and you probably won't see stuff like this from me ever again, or hard to say. I can't say never. I'm definitely not on that trip right now, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why when we first started this discussion, I told you it's closure. It's something I got the rights back to all the stories finally, and or permission to publish because the other two that were supposed to get published were in limbo, and it's a nice round 13. And well, that's a bit of a lie. There are 13 stories in there, but one of them is the story I give away for free on my website that sets the stage for the Goddess Camp,
Mm-hmm.
the glass forest. And I was like, I just need a 13th story, and I could either sit down and write one, or I can just what, I'm just going to throw the glass forest in there. It's kind of like a bonus.
Yeah.
I like to give people a substantial book. Give them something. They hold their hands and go, wow, that's a lot of work.
I do
A lot,
like a substantial book.
yeah, high value. It's
Yep.
just me. I understand that the six-figure author 40,000, 50,000 word books all the time. And, I've only got two books published, but each one of those is about the size of two and a half to three of theirs. So I'm not complaining.
And
But
they're
then,
also they're also writing a different sort of book. Like, Richard Fox, Nick Cole, like we're blessed beyond belief to know who the good ones are. I've read the bad ones, some of the bad ones, and it's just it's very no thank you. It's very I don't want it. Like sometimes you run into it and it's like it's good and then they decide they don't like where the plot's going so they 180 the plot. Like it's
it's slapdash.
it's
Yeah, there's
slapdash.
no,
And it's
yeah, they
like
just whip it out and publish it without even going back and
and
you
like
know.
Nick Cole and Jason Onsbach, Galaxy's Edge is hitting it because they invited a bunch of authors. Some of them, like J.R. Handley, is knocking out of the park. I'm told. Honestly, I'm only in Galaxy's Edge for their books, but that's just
Mm-hmm.
me. But then you have, like they invited Karen Travis to write.
Is that
Uh,
the best of us?
Yes, and
Yeah.
apparently she changed the plot, she changed the origin of hyperdrive, and it's like I don't even want to read this. It's tainting my entire view of the series. Like
Oh.
it's a certain level of yes, you can slapdash it out, but it'll only last a certain amount of time before the cracks show. And when the cracks
Mm.
show, like you'll keep the hardcore guys. Like I'm still going to read Galaxy's Edge books, but I'm not going to branch out outside of what I know is good, which is books explicitly by Jason Onsbach and Nick Cole. Maybe I'll choose The Reservist because everyone's liking it. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Wooly
Well, that's a
Ram.
shame to hear that about the best of us because I just saw it pop up in my feed the other day. Just
Well, it's
admiring the cover. The cover reminded me of like the art that I would see in like Traveler and 2300 AD from Games Workshop back in the 80s, and I was like, "There's just that, just wow!" I felt so nostalgic just looking at that cover.
well. The problem with it is that it was Karen Travis. Karen Travis was probably one of the worst of the late era Star Wars expanded universe writers. She added whatever she wanted in. She didn't care what the about the plot or the ideas or whatever. It's like, okay, X is gonna go evil now, so I'm gonna write the novel series, and it's like the Star Wars crack started to show
Mm,
before the Thrawn trilogy. I want to say around the Black Fleet Crisis, or about 5 or 6 years after the end of it. The Zahn brought it back. Then New Jedi Order happened, ish. I'm giving
Right.
a very vague and kind of loopy sort of description of it, and then we started going into the that was the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, and then we started going into Jaden being evil, and all that stuff. It just never went anywhere. Things were supposed to resolve, they would never resolve,
Mm,
and Karen
I never
Travis
stuck
was
with it that long. I read Heir to the.
yeah, and that's fine. Like it was a big part of my childhood, so I care a lot
Right.
about it. But Karen Travis wasn't good. She isn't Chuck Wendig level, not good. But did not help the series. If I was Nicole and Jason Ansbach, I wouldn't give it to her. But she is a famous author. She does sell books. I can see why they did it, and it is very funny to see a Galaxy's Edge book written by a Star Wars former writer. The problem
Mm-hmm.
is of course, it's not someone who respects intellectual property, and
Mm.
it's one of those things where it's like there's there's some white knightery going on in the Galaxy's Edge fan base, so it's like guys, please just look at the book objectively. Like, this is Nick Cole and Jason Ansbach. They're very, very good writers. You can use them as a standard for other people who write in their universe. But it's whatever. It's
I got you.
anyway. Are you Wooly Ram asked, do you game much? Did you take any inspiration from any gothic horror video games?
Actually, I, I can't really. My son's a big gamer, and I'm more of a nostalgic gamer. Like I have some favorites that are very close, very near and dear to me. Um, but as far as gothic horror video games, I really think so. No story in the collection that is the one I spoke to you about before we started, or maybe it was after we started, where the story takes place entirely in dialogue in the form of a internet chat room, and that's about as close as that I would say anything in the collection came to being inspired by gaming because my son helped me write it. He helped me come up with the usernames, which are a lot like gamer tags. So there's some really crazy little, usernames in the chat forum, and then the forum protocol and you know the way people behave and the slang they use and whatnot. But it's really just a circle of young kids, well, a lot like gamers and probably are gamers if we were to do a deep dive into their characters, who are on Reddit, and they're trying to solve the mystery of the unfavorable semicircle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with that phenomenon or not, but
Not
it's
too
it's
much.
it's a real phenomenon that I read about in an Atlas Obscura blog, and it's basically some mysterious. I think it's no longer around. I tried looking it up recently when Bardo was published just to see, but 3 years ago, it was a YouTube channel that would upload these really mysterious videos that were like static and like pixels blinking in weird places,
Mm-hmm.
and there'd be like a drone kind of sound, and sometimes there'd be a change in pitch, or and a couple of them a voice would come on and random time, and say a number over and over again, or a sequence of numbers, and there was all this you know theories going around in the small little tiny circle of people on Reddit trying to solve the mystery. Is it a number station? Is it this? Is it that? It was just eerie. And I'll tell you, when I first read about it, I'd been up for a couple of days, like you tend to do when you're working in the oil field. And I was a service technician, so I don't work on one rig. I drive in a truck, and I go from rig to rig to rig. And I'm driving. I do a lot of windshield time, or I did when I was in the
Mm-hmm.
field. You're driving underneath the stars, middle of the night, middle of nowhere, somewhere between Texas and New Mexico. You don't even know where you are, and you've been up for days, and you're all alone. You park in a field somewhere to just get a little sleep, and I started reading this, and then I started clicking on the links and going to the actual channels, and I'm probably doing not doing it justice right now. I hope the story does it justice, but I have to tell you, in that setting, in those circumstances, when I started listening to those videos, that was the creepiest damn thing I've ever experienced in my life. I was like looking out I'm looking out into the darkness. I thought I saw something in the field, and I'm just, my truck's
Mm.
idling. And I roll the window down, and it's just a coyote, and it's cold out, and the stars are out, and this video is just like 4, 7, 8. I'm like, what the it was creepy, absolutely creepy, and
Right.
I'd say that's the closest any story in the collection comes to anything gamer related, and it's not gamer related per se, but it's certainly internet.
Yeah. I'll that is pretty creepy. I love it. Uh I also want to point out that Karen Travis only has a handful of books that aren't Star Wars related, and all of them, in general, have 80 or less. Like the difference between like the nearest, like the lowest Star Wars book that's worth mentioning versus like her books, there's like a difference of like 80 plus reviews. And a lot of it's probably brought over because people like her work just a little bit. They're not highly ranked works. In case anyone is just saying I'm being sour grapes, which I am, but I'm saying that there's more to it than just women ruin everything. Um, if you do have to take like an author's entire work when it comes to fan work. She almost exclusively writes in fan universes, um, and not all of them seem to be well received.
Mm.
So it's like one of those things. It's like I don't know why, I don't know how, but she keeps getting work, and that's okay. I don't begrudge people their success. I just want to put it into context that uh, I'm not a big fan, and I don't want people to think I just do it just because I'm
Right.
whatever.
I understand what you're saying. It's like the people who had objections, to some of the changes that, let's say Captain Marvel, for example. That's a perfect, a lot of, oh, you're just saying that because no, it's really just it's that bad.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wooly Ram says, in a just world, the desecration of Star Wars would merit exile for all involved, and I think he's being a little light, because
Yeah.
somebody needs to glass Rian Johnson in a bar.
Well, it was actually quite sobering and a bit depressing when I walked out of my wife. And I was the guy. I was really into Star Wars. As a kid, as a teenager. I remember I was 17 years old and my serious girlfriend at the time. We sat down, we watched A New Hope, and I got like misty eyed. Just sharing that with her. And my grandmother would always give me the Hallmark Star Wars ornaments every year for Christmas, even as an adult. And we walked out of Rogue One, and I looked at my
Mm,
wife and I said, I just don't think I'm a fan anymore.
yep,
I'm not. I don't identify as a fan of Star Wars anymore. I just don't, and it's sad. But things change, right?
yep, and it's a lot of it's just kind of people doing it on purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
Most of it's like as long as you have a bit of a spark, anything you do has a potential for good. In the card game I play, everyone says that it used to be that any deck could win. Right now, it's not really feeling it because of how the power creep's gotten unbalanced. But it's like you can win even with crazy stuff. You can write any story, and someone out there will like it. But if you take stuff a lot of people like, and then you mess with the formula, people aren't going to like it. People will react to it. And people
Yeah,
like ourselves who know what the pattern is go, no, no, and we nope ourselves right out of there. You know, and it's like we know what's going on. We know why these things happen, and we know the the source of them. To do anything less to assume that this time it's going to be better is the height of foolishness. It's like when some of my workers brought in a Ouija board to play Ouija board in the break room. Like it was on a Saturday, so I didn't know about it till Monday, but I just about lost my crap. And basically said, I'll write anyone up who does it. And then I spent 15 minutes in prayer in the break room with the door closed and like locked with a chair under it because I didn't want any interruptions. Because it's
Right?
like, you want ghost lifting. I made it funny, but it's like it's a real, like I made a Facebook post. It's like I really regret the fact that I have to hire 99 IQ workers. Um, just because it's like you don't get the cause, the effect. It's like why are all why why is Samantha, like I have this. I'm writing something up called Beverly Hills Nephilim. I'm like getting little things together, including the statement, "The 10th circle of hell is a giant yiff pile." Um, uh, it's like it's what's under the ice that Satan's stuck in. If we're going by Dante's rules. But there's another one. It's like the guy kicks down the door. It's like, what is this? A Ouija board? He's like, you look like a Samantha. Guys, girls, what happens if Samantha just starts floating and projectile vomiting everywhere? You want projectile vomiting in the ceiling? It's like it's funny, but then again, we just had like a 2-chapter fight scene with a werewolf, and there's voodoo running around and stuff like that. And it's like,
It sounds like a lot of fun.
it is. But having to deal, like, because we know that the spiritual is real and because that informs our horror, you know, it's it's not something we can tolerate in our daily lives. Like, I have to put up with a lot of evil, because I manage people who don't really understand that they are spiritual beings as well as physical beings.
Right.
And it's not something I can deal with. I did buy this one kid a Bible. He hasn't read it yet, but that's okay. You can lead a horse to water. And you can answer all his questions about the water, but he has to choose to drink.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't burn the board, unfortunately. It never came into my possession. I would have, though. I would have.
Hmm.
But it's when you're dealing with this stuff with fans, with coworkers and stuff like that, all you can do is put your best foot forward, produce good work, good writing, and hopefully either give them a shiver of fright because they know that this isn't the real world, but rather someone's view of it, or it uplifts them and brings them higher than they could have previously thought possible.
I like that.
Hmm.
I like that a lot.
But that's all it is, I think. Anyway, we've been going at it for over an hour. Uh, got any final words for us?
No, not really, man. I mean, I'd be obviously happy if people pick it up and take a look at it. If there are, people who are familiar with the stuff I normally do, I hope they uh, take into consideration the things I've said in that foreword because it's not my standard stuff anymore. Um, but I felt that it was worth printing. Just kind of a time binder, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking forward to reading some reviews. It's got I think it's maybe got a one like
It's got 2
3 reviews
last time I checked.
too. Yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Reviews are always welcome. Other than that, it's all steam ahead on the second half of the No God series. Just like I told you earlier, probably 1 or 2 sessions away from finishing book 3, and then it's off to the editor. I got a new editor. My last one is either dead or flaked out on me. I'm not sure which. And I'm very excited to see what she can do with my drivel.
Mm-hmm.
She came highly recommended by somebody we both admire. and I'm looking forward to that. And starting the second I get done with book three, I'm not even for with the nano Rimo steam that I've generated, and then get at least half of it done this month, and then and finish it by the end of January is my goal. So it's a very ambitious goal, and I had a long talk with the wife. She's on board. She knows I'm going to be pretty much checked out. I'm going to take a break for the holidays, and then I'm going to finish it because I'm. That's one of the bad things about writing these colossal books. Is that they take a long time to write, and I'm ready to be done with the series. I have a whole bunch of plans bouncing around in my head for what I'm calling phase two of the B. Michael Stevens cinematic universe, and expect to see some big changes. I may not even be in science fiction anymore. So I got some. Well, I wouldn't say that. It's just not going to be. I'm kind of planning on starting over, if you will. Rather than trying to continue to build my brand, the No God series will always be there. And I'll always love it. It's a very near and dear story to me because of things you already know, conversations we've had in the past about how it came about as a story that I told to my son 10 years
Hmm.
ago. And but I'm ready to finish it, and I'm ready to start some new projects that have come to me in in kind of in prayer, really. I have some ideas that I think, and I'm ready to get started on that. I feel almost guilty not starting on it right away. I feel like the hand set to the plow, but I'm not going to just leave what few fans I have hanging. I'm going to finish this series. I'm going to see it through. I think they'll be satisfied with the end. It really is kind of an epic uh, love story, good versus evil story. It's not traditional military science fiction. It's not traditional fantasy. I know I beat a dead horse here. People enjoy the story arcs that you find in some of the uh, late 90s, early 2000 Final Fantasy games, particularly 7, 8, and 10. I think those people, if I can get these books in front of those people, those will be my super fans because that's really what it is. It's that kind of cosmic love story epic, and
Hmm. We'll
so
see how
it'll
it
always be
goes.
there.
Hmm. And it's it's looking pretty good. Uh, I don't ever really like I should worry about fans and stuff like that. But I'm mostly concerned with the Ben Wheeler brand, not any particular series brand. Because the series brand's fickle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading Nick Cole and Jason Ansbach for Nick Cole and Jason Ansbach, mainly Nick Cole. Um, like
So
Gods and
you checked out like the Soda Pop Soldier and things like that,
Oh,
Ben?
I've got Soda Pop Soldier, Control Alt Revolt, Soda Pop Warlord, and I don't know if you're part of the Legionnaire club that they've got where you pay $10 a month and you get things ahead of time, but I've read Gods and Legionnaire. Oh,
Mm,
it's amazing. It's just Nick
yeah,
Cole letting loose for 300 pages, and it's
nice.
it's it's fantastic. But it's like the more you work on things, the more you have ideas and themes and stuff like that that follow throughout your books, the easier it'll be. I need to publish more. I need to do more. I need to write more. I need to format more, and so on and so forth.
Well, easier
Um,
said than done. We all have day jobs, at least for the time being, and
it's
that's
true.
man, mine is demanding.
I work in a gym. It's fun herding cats and sweaty gym men. Um, but it works out, and that's all right. Honestly, like I've started doing more meal prep and stuff like that, so it's working out easier for me since I do not have a family beyond my brother and mother, father, so on and so forth.
Right.
Um, but Wooly Ram says last words: no salvation outside of the church. Uh, it is better to say no salvation outside of the blood of Christ. The church is the body of believers. The only thing they have in common is Christ. We are bound together by Him and Him alone. He is the author, finisher of our faith. He is the one who He, through the Holy Spirit, and God the Father, of course, gave us these muses, these spirits of fire that live within our hearts, that make us speak to a strange and otherwise unseen truth that, quite frankly, only we can give our individual voices to as artists, as authors. Therefore, it is more our responsibility and it is our blessing to do our best to communicate them and send out bright, shining flares into an otherwise godless and hopeless world.
Brilliant. Bravo. God, I wish could. Who said that?
Me, I just made it up now.
Are
Uh,
you kidding me?
no,
Would you write that down and send it to me?
it's recording. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. I'll
Thank you.
record it, but I'll write it down and send it out as well. But
Thank you. My
uh,
goodness, that's brilliant.
it's to me the faith and everything like that is completely worthless. It's not the church I go to or anything like that. It's the blood of Christ. That's what's blotting out my sin. That's what's making me pure like snow. Uh,
Amen.
and
Amen.
it's barely, it's faith in the wrong things if you think that, sitting in the right pew and taking the right wafer once a week or once a month or whatever you do, is what saves you. Not that I mean to call you out or anything like that, but I just want to make sure that it's out there. Anyway.
No, I love it. I love it.
hmm Well, it's a pleasure, as always, to have those people who join us and those people who are watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, I'm probably going to reach out to Benjamin Chia and just keep this Ben party train going.
I love it, man. I'll be there in the comments. I need to come and listen more.
Oh yeah, but you'll find me talking about mundane things. The last week, I talked with Scott Huggins for like half an hour on Monster Girls. Have a good night, guys.
Hey, you too.